The HOA proudly announced their mission to build affordable homes for everyone. But as the fine print unfolded, many residents began questioning whether this promise was real or just another money-making scheme disguised as community service. The HOA's grand promise, affordable living for all. The announcement came on a bright Saturday morning, the kind of morning that seemed perfectly staged for optimism. Sunlight draped over the community center's manicured lawn. Banners hung across the entrance with bold lettering. A new beginning for our neighborhood. Affordable homes for everyone. People from all corners of the town gathered, curiosity buzzing in the air, children tugging at their parents' hands while couples exchanged hopeful glances. The HOA board had promised something unprecedented, and in a place where families often struggled to keep up with rising housing costs, their words landed like a miracle. At the heart of it stood Richard Halverson, the HOA president. He was a tall man with slicked-back silver hair, his smile rehearsed and confident, his suit far more expensive than most residents could afford. He took the podium with the composure of a seasoned politician, though technically he was just a neighborhood representative. The microphone crackled and a hush swept over the crowd. "Friends," he began, voice smooth and authoritative, "we've heard your concerns. We've listened to your struggles. And today, I'm proud to announce that our HOA is launching a project that will change lives. Affordable homes, designed for our hardworking families, built right here in our own community." The applause was immediate, rolling like thunder through the crowd. Mothers clapped with tears in their eyes. Fathers nodded approvingly, arms crossed, but relieved. Young couples squeezed each other's hands, already imagining what their future might look like inside one of those promised homes. The word affordable echoed in every heart, a word that had grown elusive in recent years, with property values soaring and wages stubbornly stagnant. Halverson went on, painting a picture almost too good to be true. These homes will be modern, energy efficient, and built with families in mind. They will not only be affordable to purchase, but affordable to maintain. No more worrying about sky-high utility bills, no more endless rent payments. This is the start of true homeownership for everyone. Behind him, a projector displayed glossy renderings of tidy rows of houses, each with a cheerful front porch, green lawns, and flower beds bursting with color. The images looked like something from a magazine, clean and idyllic, untouched by the imperfections of real life. The crowd leaned forward as though the images were promises etched into stone. Among the audience was a young mother named Carla Jensen. She balanced her 3-year-old daughter on her hip, her face glowing with cautious hope. For years, Carla had juggled 2 jobs, scraping together just enough to cover rent in a cramped apartment. She dreamed of a backyard where her daughter could play, a quiet bedroom where she wouldn't wake to the sound of neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls. When Halverson spoke of affordable homes, it felt as though he was speaking directly to her. She wasn't alone. Dozens of others shared that same longing look, the look of people who had waited too long for a break, for stability, for something permanent. Halverson's speech continued, swelling with dramatic pauses and carefully measured sincerity. He spoke of partnerships with developers, of grants and subsidies, of how the HOA had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make the project possible. Every word seemed wrapped in benevolence, crafted to convince the community that this wasn't just another plan. It was salvation. And yet, if anyone had looked closely enough, they might have noticed the flicker in his eyes when he mentioned financing, or the way certain board members exchanged tight glances at the mention of sustainable pricing models. But in that moment, no one wanted to look too closely. The promise was too sweet, too necessary. Carla clapped until her hands stung. Around her, others shouted, "Finally!" and "It's about time." Some even hugged each other as though the houses already belonged to them. Hope, once a fragile thing, surged like wildfire. After the speech, flyers were handed out. The papers were thick, glossy, expensive to print, a sign of just how much money the HOA had already poured into appearances. The flyer's front page read in bold, "Your dream home awaits." Inside, it detailed the supposed benefits: reduced down payments, low monthly costs, modern amenities, and community support. It all sounded perfect, almost too perfect. But as residents scanned the fine print, a few raised eyebrows. Carla noticed it too, though at first she dismissed it. Terms like subject to adjustment, initial phase pricing, and variable HOA contribution floated across the page. They were vague, harmless-sounding phrases tucked into the corners of the promise. Nobody wanted to linger on them. Not yet. That evening, the neighborhood buzzed with conversation. At the diner on Maple Street, people gathered in booths and at counters, speculating about when construction would begin, how much homes would actually cost, and whether they'd finally be able to stop renting. The chatter was electric, optimism outweighing doubt. But in the far corner of the diner, two older residents exchanged wary glances. Henry and Martha, both retired, had lived in the neighborhood for decades. They had seen HOAs make promises before, each one wrapped in honeyed words but laced with hidden costs. "It sounds good," Martha whispered, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But nothing that good comes without a catch." Henry grunted, nodding. "They say affordable, but whose definition of affordable are we talking? Not ours, I'll bet." Still, they kept their voices low. Suspicion was unpopular that night, and hope was the reigning mood. Nobody wanted to be the pessimist when a dream seemed within reach. Weeks passed, and the HOA worked tirelessly to keep the dream alive in people's minds. They hosted open houses where model kitchens gleamed with stainless steel appliances, where bedrooms were staged with cozy quilts and sunlit windows. Realtors hired by the HOA walked families through the models, encouraging them to imagine this as your future. Carla walked through one of the models, her daughter giggling as she bounced on the bed in the children's room. Carla closed her eyes for a moment, picturing birthday parties in the backyard, family dinners in the dining room. She wanted to believe it. She needed to believe it. Outside, brochures were handed out again, this time with even more detail. Monthly payments were listed in bold, and they looked manageable, at least on the surface. But once again, tiny footnotes cluttered the bottom of each page. Pricing subject to HOA assessments. Special fees may apply. Most people ignored those footnotes. They were just legal jargon, weren't they? At the next community meeting, Halverson beamed as he announced that interest in the project had exceeded expectations. "We have more applicants than homes available in the first phase," he declared. "This proves how much our community needed this initiative." The crowd roared with applause again, drowning out the quiet unease that some still felt. And as the meeting ended, as neighbors shook hands and shared dreams of their future homes, no one could shake the sense that something monumental was happening. Something that would change the community forever, for better or for worse. Hidden costs and broken trust. The reality behind the homes. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. The homes were finished faster than anyone had expected, and the ribbon-cutting ceremony was covered in the local newspaper. Photographers captured smiling families standing proudly in front of their new houses, keys clutched tightly in hand, the words, "A New Dawn for Affordable Living," plastered across the headline. It was the image of triumph, proof, at least on the surface, that the HOA had delivered what it promised. Carla Jensen stood on her freshly poured driveway, her daughter twirling in circles on the front lawn. For the first time in her life, Carla felt like she was standing on solid ground. The mortgage was higher than she had hoped, but the paperwork had framed it as temporary, adjustable as needed, and the real estate agent reassured her that any changes would be minimal. She ignored the knot in her stomach. She wanted this. She deserved this. Neighbors congratulated one another, sharing celebratory cookouts and housewarming parties. The air smelled of barbecues and fresh paint, laughter spilling out into the streets as children played together under the soft glow of new streetlights. It felt, for a fleeting moment, like utopia. But utopias don't last. The first crack appeared in the form of a letter. Carla found it in her mailbox one Thursday afternoon, a crisp envelope bearing the HOA S seal. She tore it open, expecting a welcome message or perhaps an update on community events. Instead, her eyes fell on a bill. Monthly HOA dues, $285. She frowned. During the meetings, they had been told that dues would be minimal, somewhere around $75 to cover landscaping and maintenance. Nearly 4 times that amount was not minimal. Beneath the bold figure was a breakdown: general maintenance, security services, administrative fees. Each line was vague, offering no real explanation. Carla called her neighbor James, a father of 2 who had moved in across the street. "Did you get one of these?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Yeah," James sighed, holding his own letter. "I thought it had to be a mistake. I even called the number on the letterhead. You know what they told me? All fees are subject to adjustment as outlined in your contract." Carla's stomach dropped. That fine print she had ignored, subject to adjustment, was suddenly staring her in the face. Within days, whispers spread across the neighborhood. Families compared notes, realizing they had all received the same bill. Some were angry, others confused. And a few tried to brush it off as a temporary oversight. But then the second month's bill arrived, slightly higher than the first. This time it was $310. The HOA held another meeting, and the community center was packed to the brim. Halverson stood at the podium again, smiling as though nothing was amiss. "I know many of you have concerns about the dues," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Let me assure you, these fees are not only necessary, but they are an investment in your property value. By keeping our community safe, clean, and attractive, we ensure your homes remain desirable, which benefits you in the long run." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "But you said it would be affordable!" Halverson raised his hands, silencing the room with a commanding gesture. "Friends, affordability doesn't mean cutting corners. It means providing sustainable living at a fair cost. You'll see, these homes are still far below market value compared to surrounding neighborhoods." It was a clever deflection, and some nodded reluctantly. Nobody wanted to admit they might have made a mistake by moving in. But the bills didn't stop. By the 4th month, the dues had climbed to $350, and special assessments began appearing. One notice cited the need for additional landscaping to maintain the neighborhood-esque aesthetic. Another referenced a security initiative that required installing cameras at the entrances. Each assessment added hundreds of dollars to the bills. Carla's budget began to buckle. Her second job at the diner barely covered the extra costs, and she found herself skipping meals so her daughter could have more. James confided that he was dipping into his savings just to keep up. Another neighbor, a single mother named Denise, broke down crying during a block gathering, admitting she was already behind on payments. The HOA's response was merciless. Late fees stacked up quickly, and warnings arrived in red ink. Failure to pay will result in legal action. For families who had believed they were finally stepping into stability, it was a cruel twist of the knife. And yet it wasn't just the money. Rules began trickling in, each one more restrictive than the last. No satellite dishes, no basketball hoops in driveways, no lawn ornaments without prior approval. Even paint colors had to be submitted for review. Carla's neighbor Denise received a violation notice for leaving her trash can out an hour past the designated pickup time. The fine, $75. The community that had once felt alive with hope now simmered with frustration. Conversations at the diner shifted from excitement to dread. People whispered about selling, but the market wasn't kind. Their homes were already worth less than they had paid, thanks to the burdensome HOA fees scaring off potential buyers. One evening, Carla sat at her kitchen table, bills spread out in front of her, her daughter asleep upstairs. The weight of it all pressed down like a physical force. She remembered the promise Halverson had made, the words that had once filled her with hope. Affordable homes designed for hardworking families. Now she couldn't shake the feeling that those words had been nothing more than bait. Across town, Henry and Martha, the older couple who had been skeptical from the beginning, weren't surprised. "We've seen this before," Henry muttered, sipping his tea as Martha read the latest HOA notice aloud. "They lure you in with shiny promises, then bleed you dry with fees." Martha frowned, her eyes weary. "But these folks, they're younger. They didn't know. They trusted them." Henry's jaw tightened. Trust is the first thing HOAs take advantage of. Hidden costs and broken trust. The reality behind the homes. The breaking point for many came with the so-called community improvement fee. One morning, every household received a thick packet in the mail, neatly bound with the HOA's logo embossed on the cover. Inside was a letter informing residents that, after careful review, the HOA had voted to approve a special assessment of $1,200 per household. The reason? To maintain and enhance the long-term quality of the neighborhood experience. No one knew what that actually meant. The letter listed vague projects, upgraded landscaping, a new security gate, and something called a community beautification fund. But no specific timelines, no itemized breakdowns, no explanation of why these upgrades were necessary when most families were already struggling to pay their rising dues. Carla stared at the figure, her hands trembling. $1,200. She barely had enough to cover next month's mortgage, and now they were demanding nearly an entire month's wages in one lump sum. Her first instinct was to call the HOA office, but when she did, the woman on the other end of the line answered with a rehearsed politeness that felt like stone. "It's mandatory, Ms. Jensen. All homeowners are responsible for contributing. You'll find the due date listed on page 3. Carla's voice cracked. "I don't have that kind of money just lying around." "Then you'll need to arrange a payment plan. But keep in mind, additional fees may apply for late or partial payments." The line went dead with a click, leaving Carla staring at the phone in disbelief. That night, the neighborhood buzzed with fury. James stormed over, waving his own packet. "This is theft, plain and simple," he shouted, his voice carrying across the cul-de-sac. Denise stood beside him, tears streaking her face. "They can't do this to us," she cried. "We don't even know what we're paying for." Neighbors gathered in driveways, voices rising as frustration boiled over. But amid the shouting, one truth hung heavy in the air. They had signed the contracts. They had agreed, even if they hadn't fully understood what they were agreeing to. The fine print was ironclad. The HOA knew it, and they exploited it. Soon the penalties began to pile up. Late fees turned into liens, and liens turned into threats of foreclosure. Carla heard of one family 3 streets over, the Ramirez family, who had fallen 2 months behind. Within weeks, they received a letter stating that the HOA had the legal right to place their home up for auction if they didn't pay immediately. Fear spread faster than anger. No one wanted to lose their homes, the very homes they had fought so hard to obtain, the homes that were supposed to be their salvation. So, grudgingly, people paid. They borrowed from savings, maxed out credit cards, and begged relatives for help. The dream of affordable living had turned into a desperate scramble to keep roofs over their heads, and the rules only tightened. By mid-year, the HOA had implemented a compliance officer, a man named Mr. Duffy, who drove slowly through the neighborhood each morning in a white SUV, clipboard in hand. Residents began calling him the Hawk because of the way he circled, eyes scanning every yard, every porch, every parked car. Carla received her first violation when her daughter left a tricycle in the front yard overnight. "Items must not be left unattended in visible areas. Fine, $50. She crumpled the notice in her fist, rage bubbling inside her. James got fined for parking his work truck, a perfectly clean, modest pickup, in his own driveway. The letter claimed it detracted from the aesthetic value of the neighborhood. The fine? $100, plus a warning that repeat violations could lead to further action. Every week seemed to bring new rules, new restrictions, new ways for the HOA to squeeze more money from families who had nowhere else to go. The tension began to fracture the community itself. Where once neighbors had bonded over shared excitement, now suspicion crept in. Some whispered that a few residents were reporting others for minor infractions, hoping to curry favor with the HOA or deflect attention from themselves. Others withdrew entirely, too ashamed to admit they were drowning in debt. Carla noticed it in herself, too. She stopped waving at Duffy's SUV when it crawled past. She started closing her blinds during the day, hiding the mounting stacks of unopened envelopes on her kitchen table. The joy she once felt when she unlocked her front door was gone, replaced by a cold pit of dread. Her daughter, too young to understand fully, sensed it. "Mommy," she asked one night as Carla tucked her into bed, "why are you sad all the time now? Don't you like our new house?" Carla forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "I love it," she whispered, though her throat tightened with the lie. But the worst was still to come. One humid July evening, the HOA called an emergency meeting at the community center. The notice claimed it was to discuss important financial adjustments. The room was packed, residents buzzing nervously. Carla sat beside James and Denise, her palms sweating. Halverson strode to the podium as calm and confident as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we've encountered unexpected costs in maintaining the high standards of our neighborhood. To continue protecting your investments, the board has voted to implement an additional surcharge. Effective next month, HOA dues will increase to $425 per household." The room erupted. People shouted, cursed, demanded explanations. A man in the back yelled, "You said this would be affordable." Halverson didn't flinch. "We are still affordable," he said smoothly. "Look at the homes around you. Look at the value. Do you want your property to fall into disrepair? Do you want weeds and vandalism? Of course not. This increase ensures our community remains strong." Carla felt her vision blur with tears. $425. More than her monthly grocery budget, more than her car payment. It was the price of hope turning into chains. She looked around the room at her neighbors, their faces twisted in disbelief, anger, despair. And for the first time since moving in, Carla realized the truth. This wasn't a community. It was a trap. Voices of the community, fighting back for real affordability. The meeting where Halverson announced the dues increase left the neighborhood simmering with rage. People poured out of the community center, muttering curses under their breath, clutching the new bills as though they were death sentences. Some stomped to their cars, others lingered in groups, venting their frustrations in hurried whispers. Carla walked home in silence, her daughter asleep in the stroller. James trailed beside her, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscle twitched at his temple. Denise shuffled along behind them, shoulders slumped as though she carried the entire neighborhood's burdens on her back. Finally, James spoke. "We can't keep letting them do this to us." Carla looked at him, startled. His voice carried a new edge, not just anger, but resolve. "They hold all the power," Denise said weakly. "What choice do we have?" James stopped walking and turned to face them, his eyes burning in the glow of the streetlight. "We fight back. We organize. That's the only way." Carla wanted to argue, to say it was hopeless, but deep down she knew he was right. The contracts, the rules, the fees, none of it mattered if the people stood together. The HOA thrived on fear and silence. What if they broke both? That night, in the dim light of her kitchen, Carla wrote her first note to the neighbors. Just a scrap of paper with shaky handwriting. "We need to talk tomorrow night. My place, 7 p.m. She slipped it into James's mailbox, then Denise's, then 2 more houses she trusted. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next evening, her living room filled with nervous faces. James sat at the head of the table. Carla poured coffee into mismatched mugs, and Denise handed out cookies she had baked that morning. There were only 9 of them, a fraction of the neighborhood. But their voices carried weight. "This can't go on," James began. "They're bleeding us dry. If we keep paying, we'll all lose everything anyway. So we need to decide right now. Are we willing to stand up to them?" Murmurs rippled through the group. Some nodded immediately. Others shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward the door as if afraid someone from the HOA might be listening. Carla spoke next. "I moved here because I believed them. I thought this would be a safe place for my daughter, a home we could be proud of. But instead, I'm terrified every time I open the mailbox. That's not affordable. That's not what we were promised." Her voice cracked, but the fire in her words spread. One by one, others began to share their stories. The single father who skipped meals so his kids could eat. The elderly couple who feared they would lose the home they had downsized into. The young teacher who worked weekends just to cover the fees. Each story was a thread, weaving together into something stronger. Unity. They made their first decision that night, to dig deeper. "We need to know where the money's going," James said. "If we can prove they're abusing funds, we'll have a case." So began the investigation. Carla volunteered to request financial statements from the HOA. It was every homeowner's right, buried in the bylaws. She wrote a formal letter, carefully worded, and hand-delivered it to the HOA office. The receptionist smiled too brightly as she accepted it, her eyes flicking nervously toward the back office. Weeks passed before Carla received a response. A thick envelope arrived, stuffed with spreadsheets and charts that looked official but made little sense. Expenses were listed under vague categories like maintenance and administration. Numbers didn't add up. Tens of thousands of dollars were marked simply as consulting fees. Carla spread the papers across her kitchen table, frustration bubbling inside her. "They're hiding something," she muttered. James leaned over her shoulder, scanning the figures. "Look at this. They've spent more on community beautification than on actual repairs. And here, executive compensation? That's just Halverson lining his pockets. The more they dug, the worse it looked. The funds were being siphoned into shell projects, inflated contracts, and ambiguous fees. The so-called security cameras? Installed by a company owned by Halverson's cousin. The landscaping, outsourced to a firm that charged triple the standard rate, conveniently owned by another board member, S. brother-in-law. The outrage spread like wildfire once the group shared their findings. Neighbors who had been silent before now found their voices. Quiet conversations turned into late-night meetings, whispers into shouts of anger. But the HOA wasn't blind. They noticed the shift. Soon, violation notices began arriving at the homes of those most vocal. James received 3 in 1 week, one for a cracked driveway, another for improperly trimmed hedges, and a third for leaving his garbage can visible for 15 minutes too long. The fines piled up, deliberate acts of intimidation. Carla's turn came next. A letter accused her of unauthorized alterations after she planted a few flowers by her mailbox. The fine was $200. She knew it was retaliation. Still, the group refused to back down. Instead, they grew bolder. Denise suggested they bring in outside help, a lawyer or journalist. "If we go public, they can't control the story anymore," she said. It was risky, but they all agreed. James contacted a consumer rights attorney he knew from work, while Carla reached out to the local newspaper. At first, both seemed skeptical. HOAs had a reputation for being untouchable, fortified by contracts and legal jargon. But once they saw the documents, the inflated fees, the shady connections, the mounting violations, their interest sharpened. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, promised to dig deeper. "If what you're saying is true," she told Carla, This isn't just about your neighborhood. It's about exposing a system that preys on people under the guise of community. For the first time, hope flickered again. But this time, it wasn't the false hope handed down by the HOA. It was the fragile, defiant hope of people taking back control. Voices of the community, fighting back for real affordability. The HOA struck back hard once they sensed resistance gaining traction. Flyers appeared on doorsteps, warning residents about the dangers of misinformation and urging them not to trust certain individuals who seek to destabilize the community. At the next board meeting, Halverson stood tall at the podium and condemned the rumors. "Don't let lies divide us," he said, his voice ringing with mock sincerity. "We are working tirelessly for your benefit. Those who challenge us are hurting the value of your homes." Some residents still clung to his words, either out of fear or denial. But others, those who had seen the documents with their own eyes, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The room felt split down the middle, loyalty and rebellion colliding in every glance. Carla felt the tension gnawing at her nerves. She could practically hear her heart pounding as she stood to speak. "We're not spreading lies. We've seen where the money is going. We have proof." Halverson's smile faltered, but only for a fraction of a second. Then he leaned forward, voice oily with condescension. "Ms. Jensen, if you're so convinced, I suggest you bring this so-called proof to the proper authorities instead of disturbing your neighbors with paranoia." Carla's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. "That's exactly what we're doing." The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, others nodded, and Halverson's eyes hardened into daggers. The following weeks became a battle of wills. Rachel, the journalist, began publishing a series of articles. The first headline read, "Affordable Homes or Hidden Trap, HOA Under Fire for Questionable Practices." The article detailed inflated fees, shady contracts, and testimonies from residents like Carla and James. Photos accompanied the piece, images of violation notices, unexplained charges, and even the luxurious SUV Halverson had recently purchased. The article spread quickly, igniting outrage beyond their neighborhood. Nearby communities reached out with similar stories, sharing evidence of their own struggles with HOAs. What had started as one neighborhood's fight was turning into something bigger, a movement. Halverson, furious, called an emergency board session. Notices warned residents that outside interference was putting the neighborhood's future at risk. Threats of lawsuits loomed, directed at anyone who spoke publicly. But the community had tasted a kind of freedom they hadn't known before, the freedom of truth, and it was too late to silence them. James stood on Carla's porch one evening, his voice grim but steady. "They're going to try to scare us. They're going to threaten us. But if we cave now, we lose everything. Are you ready for this?" Carla looked at her daughter playing on the floor, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around them. Fear coiled in her stomach, but she nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." The tipping point came with the lawsuit. The attorney James had contacted filed an official complaint on behalf of the residents, citing misuse of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and predatory practices. The case hit the local courthouse, drawing attention from regional media. Cameras showed up at the entrance of the neighborhood, reporters eager for sound bites. Halverson tried to spin it as a smear campaign, but cracks began to show. Under oath, board members stumbled over questions about financial decisions. Receipts and contracts told a damning story of self-dealing and corruption. Each revelation stripped away another layer of the HOA's carefully crafted image. The residents, once cowed by fear, now found their voices louder than ever. They packed the courtroom, filling the benches with determined faces. Carla sat in the front row, clutching Denise's hand, as James testified about the endless violations and mounting fees. When Rachel published her third article, the headline was harsher, bolder. HOA Empire Crumbling, Evidence of Corruption Mounts. The community buzzed with renewed energy. Strangers dropped off food at Carla's doorstep, thanking her for speaking out. Donations poured into the legal fund. What had begun as despair was transforming into solidarity. The climax arrived on a gray morning in late autumn. The judge delivered his ruling. The HOA had grossly misused funds, engaged in deceptive practices, and violated their fiduciary duties. Certain contracts were declared void. Board members, including Halverson, were removed from their positions, pending investigation for potential fraud. The gavel's crack echoed like thunder. Cheers erupted in the courtroom. Tears streaked down Denise's cheeks. James hugged Carla so tightly she thought her ribs might crack. For the first time in months, the weight pressing down on their chests lifted. But the victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. When Carla returned home that day, she stood on her porch breathing in the crisp air. The house still carried the scars of the struggle, bills, fines, debts, but it no longer felt like a cage. It was hers again. Not because of the HOA, but because she and her neighbors had fought for it. That evening, the community gathered in the park. Families brought food, children ran free, laughter spilled into the air. No HOA banners, no staged presentations, no hollow promises, just people, tired, scarred, but together. Carla stood with James and Denise watching the scene unfold. "We did it," she whispered. James nodded, his face finally relaxed. "We proved that affordability isn't about glossy flyers or false promises. It's about people standing together. That's what makes a home affordable, when it's built on trust, not fear." Carla smiled, her daughter tugging at her hand. For the first time since moving in, she felt peace. Not the fragile illusion the HOA had sold them, but the real kind, the kind earned through struggle, sacrifice, and unity. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in golden light, Carla knew one truth above all else. They had taken back more than their homes. They had taken back their community,